So this is the Polygen game, which has gone through a few revisions, and it was deployed at EMF Camp, which is in summary Glastonbury for geeks. It's like, yeah, you camp, there's power to your tent, there's Wi-Fi across the site, there's lots of high-speed internet, and lots of geeks bringing all sorts of wonderful contraptions and creations. And this was one of mine. So the game went through. There we go. So what is the game? Basically, it's a fictional power generation company, Polygen, and they're part of Polybius Biotech, which is again a fictional corporation at EMF Camp. There's 26 of these little fusion generators that I created. They're called portable fusion generators because why not? This is the future after all. And deploy them all over the campsite. And what would happen is players would take their RFID cards, go up to one of them, tap on it. It would ask them to pick a team. And once it cycles through all those teams, they can pick which one they want. And then whenever they go to any of these units and tap that same RFID token, it will change the color of that unit to their team. So they're capturing it for their team. And the idea is that each time you visit one, you get a bonus point for just visiting it. Whenever you capture it, you get points for how long you hold it for. So the idea is to hold it as your color as long as possible, as much of the time as possible. And yeah, you could do things like boost. So if it's already on your team color and you go and visit it, then you'll boost the output of that unit as well. So all those things kind of went into the scoring. Now, the idea originally came to me in probably around 2018. It's a little bit Ingress inspired for anybody who's played Ingress. That had portals that you would change to your color. So that was the idea. So these are kind of the history of the game very quickly. Orbs game was in 2018. You can see it's just a little ball with an antenna sticking out the top. All it could do was make bleeping sounds and flash certain colored LEDs, and it had four different color LEDs. I think it was red, green, blue, and white. Then the PolyCoin game was the one I did in 2022, and that utilized sort of RGB strips to do all the colors. It had a side illuminated central section that would light up just to show you what color owned it at any one time. And it used a new PCB with that utilized a better, well, it could play full audio, had an MP3 player built in, that sort of thing. The Polygen game is more or less the same as the PolyCoin game in terms of the electronics inside. Very little change there. I reused the same PCBs. The difference was the case. So the Polygen case was entirely different. That's where most of it came from. So several things went wrong with the Orbs game, which is why I made the change. It kind of fell apart because it's held together with stickers. There was no battery monitoring, so if one went flat, I had no idea what was going on, what the battery level was, or anything. It had some security around messaging, but the sequencing could go out of sync occasionally, and that caused a few comms issues. I discovered that cheap pin headers don't always work, and actually sometimes direct soldering is the answer. I also noticed that power management didn't always work reliably, so I ended up in the later ones putting in bits so I could actually monitor, is power management working of each of the components? Do I turn it off? Does it stop responding to me? And I turn it back on? Yes, it's now responding. Okay, my power management is working as best as I can tell. So it had some self-diagnostics I wanted to add as well. It was very hard to reconfigure the Wi-Fi settings on the Orbs game. It involved opening it up and reprogramming stuff. And also people just wanted to go inside them, so they tended to fall apart because people were pulling them apart. And I also discovered ESP8266s aren't all equal. There's you can buy a batch of them and they can have duplicate MAC addresses. You can have you can find that some of them you flash them twice and then they don't take any programming ever again. Yeah, so I switched to the 8285 for the later ones. PolyCoin greatly improved, but the reason why the cases were changed is the cases didn't hold together as well as I'd hoped. People tended to push in the center, and I did do a mod to kind of hold the center disc in place a bit better. But the real problem was that PLA and a hot tent don't mix, and it's possible to exceed the glassing point of PLA in a tent in summer. As a result, the backs of the sort of many of the units look more like Pringles rather than flat backs. So they weren't holding together anymore. So it basically meant most of the cases were trashed anyway. So I had to rethink it. They also had a habit of snapping where you'd hang it from, because that was along a layer line. So if you pulled something quite hard along that layer line, it was more prone to snapping. This was the PolyCoin case, just to give you an idea. And you can see, oh, the other problem was the speaker was at the back, because the front just had nowhere for me to put a speaker. And unfortunately, when you put that up against, say, a tent, then all the sound is muffled and you just can't hear it. So people were saying they couldn't hear the units. And these were the case connections. They worked okay, but the moment you unclip them once, they don't really go back together again. You have to replace them. Fortunately, they were very replaceable, but the rest of it let it down. As you can see here, there's lots of bits that could be snapped off. So lots of pillars and things. So I had problems with bits of the case just snapping off inside. So Polygen, I wanted to do something different, and I wanted to unbreakable. Well, as unbreakable as a 3D printer can do. So I printed it in polycarbonate, and that required an enclosed printer with a very high nozzle temperature. So there's no risk of these melting in a tent. If one of the Polygen cases melts in a tent, I've got bigger problems than my Polygen case melting. It's probably on fire. So I got myself a Bamboo Labs X1 Carbon, which can do sort of high temperature filaments. It can also do filament changes. So it can print multiple filaments and swap between them as it goes. It's still all written in designed in Tinkercad, which is very easy to use, and why I've never got off it again. I need to try some of the more powerful products, but it does the job. So this is the inside of a Polygen case. Now I should probably, everyone who isn't in the room, show this is a Polygen unit. So that's the back of it. You can see the multicolor that are printed using the X1 Carbon's ability to change the filament. And the main thing about this case, when you're 3D printing, is it has no supports required at all. So you can print it without any supports. And that's because of the multiple parts that you can see. So you've got the red one is the front of the case. So you can see that's inside, and the PCB lays down inside that. But it actually slides up, so it captures the PCB, so it doesn't slide around. The little supports around the edges that you can see, those actually carry the LED strip, so that runs through there and around. The two little holes that you can see at the very top of that red one, they are places to put screws in, and they're not to screw anything together. They're just to add metal reinforcement to where this is hung from. So it provides extra strength. And then at the bottom, you can see two little kind of slots. And those slots, actually, if you look at the very bottom red to the left, you've got two little red kind of peg-like things. What happens is those slot into those slot together. And you actually put 2p coins in there. And the reason you put 2p coins in there is, well, let's just say it has to be a relatively modern 2p coin because they're magnetic. What I use is when you slide the speaker section, which is the dark blue, when you slide that in, those actually latch over the bottom of the blue, kind of where there's these two little lugs just here and here. You can see, so this bit here slides up over it, hooks on, and then to unhook it, you've got the 2p coin, and you apply magnets to the back, and it pulls them up, so it unhooks, so you can then remove it. The speaker slides in here, so where that just pushes up and is held in place by a bit just here that just provides an extra grip. And then this is the back. The light blue one is the back. The little vertical holder is to hold a USB-C charge module. so you can recharge them. So that's what that little hole is at the back there. So I can plug a USB charger into there. This other bit that sticks up, that's a combination of things. It's a retainer, so it's got a little screw hole to help with retention when you slide it, when you want to hold it in place. And it also acts as a tamper switch, so it pushes down a tamper detection button on the PCB. So if you slide the back out, the PCB will then know that you've opened it up and will then take appropriate action. This little funny thing here is my multi-purpose tool. It does many things. It holds the antenna, so you can't see it, but there's a hole going through this way. So it sits just here over the PCB, and the antenna then sits up the length of the board that way. So this holds the antenna and allows you to remove it. It also hooks onto this bit here when you slide it down. So push it down there, and it basically stops it moving out of place. It also, the MP3 player sits just here, and this stops the micro SD card from escaping. So if there's a knock to the board that could pop the micro SD card out, can't go anymore. So that stops that going any place. Also, the arch bit here comes across here and down, and just here is the power button on the PCB. So on the back of the case, you can squeeze the back of the case very slightly, and you'll compress that down and turn the unit on. So it's a way, an external power button without having to have anything visible or accessible. Yeah, and it stops the PCB being slid out. And it's what, if you look here, this little hole, you screw from here into that hole. So that's basically locking the back onto this, so it can't come out. So yeah, that does a lot. It's got a lot of heavy lifting for a tiny bit of plastic. And then the last bit to go in is this. This is the last one. You push that on and it clicks into place. These bits click over the top, and now you have an assembled unit. There's an LED, a set of LEDs that are here. So there's two NeoPixel strings. One goes all the way around the outside, and the other is in a square shape around the middle. And yeah, so that's the case. Oh, and yeah, you can see here where you hang it up. It's just there, little hole there, little hole there. You just thread it through, so you can hang it up that way. Quick hardware comparison between them. As I said, it can play. It's got an MP3 player. It goes a lot louder as well, so you can make it sound things. One of the things I really wanted to do, PolyCoin just had a voice, had no sound effects. This one I wanted to make some sound effects as well. I wanted to make it a bit more interesting. It can turn itself off because it's got battery management, so it will actually, if it decides to, for whatever reason, turn itself off. And it does actually do that deliberately when the battery gets too low, because yeah, that's not good. The other thing it will do is, there's a very particular and peculiar problem I've come across with MicroPython on some of the ESP modules. I don't know if it's specific to MicroPython or something else, but the real-time clock runs at about 10 times real time, randomly, and I don't know why it does it. And the only fix is to fully power the module down. Setting it to sleep, doing anything else doesn't clear that state, so it turns itself off. And I used a bigger PIC micro so I could actually fit more code in. Unfortunately, the bigger PIC micro from PolyCoin to Polygen, I've now filled the bigger PIC micro. So I don't know where I go from here. But that's the PCB, to give you an idea. This is exactly the same, as I said, between Polygen and PolyCoin. So yeah, it's the MP3 player. There's a tamper button. The other tamper switch, the one at the very top of the screen, that one was removed for Polygen because we only use one tamper switch, didn't need the other one. And it takes 3 in parallel 18650 batteries. I recommend making sure that you always put them in the correct way. On one occasion, I put one in back to front, and I discovered that the PCB does act as a fuse. And I was -1 track on the PCB, where it literally melted it. This is the other side. So you got the RFID reader, the PIC micros up here on the far right, and the power management is on the left. A lot of this was all about how to deliver this with the best power management I could. So the reason for a PIC Micro is because it can run very low powered over long periods of time. It can go to sleep and use nanowatts. It can wake up and do a lot of stuff and go back to sleep and use very little power and do it in very little time. The ESP8285 can do a lot more, but it's very power hungry by comparison. So I only power that up to do Wi-Fi comms. And I use an external antenna because when you're in a field with lots and lots of devices, you're competing. So you need a proper full-size antenna. The little trace antennas just don't work very well. There's a little series of FETs on the top right, which you can see, and those actually turn the LED pixel strings off when they're not in use. So unfortunately, WS2812s draw a lot of power when they're doing nothing at all. So they use about 1 milliamp each LED. So you don't want that in a battery powered device. So I actually turn the strings off when I'm not using them. And the same for the MP3 player. That's a circuit diagram. I hope you all absorbed that. So it's written in a couple of languages, the device. So there's MicroPython on the ESP8285. That does all of the Wi-Fi comms. It talks via MQTT back to a game server that deals with the actual game mechanics there. And it was used Proton or Positron PIC basic compiler for the PIC Micro. That's how I program them. So this is how I wrote to the different chips. I have little pogo pins that connect onto the PCB, so it's very easy to just hold it on there, press the program button, and off you go. So yeah, the server, do you know what? Before we do that, what I'm going to do, should always do a live demonstration at some point. Okay, this is powering up. Hopefully this will work. It doesn't, it's because my hotspot's turned off. And it's not. Hotspot's on. Hopefully one of these comes on. Yeah, never do a live demonstration when it. What's weird is I tested it before I left home. Wi-Fi failed. Interesting. And this one's going to be the same. Okay. It would have been nice to do a demonstration, but apparently I'm not allowed to.
What demonstration was that? So the Wi-Fi failed?
Yeah.
Correctly here then?
Yeah. There's only one other possibility.
The one started up.
Sorry?
Second one started up.
Yeah, they won't work, unfortunately, like that. I think what I need to do, I just need to double check. Yeah, I'm on my own Wi-Fi. See if I can. Hopefully this. There we go. Right. Just going to very quickly see if I can get this to work. So what I'll do while I'm trying to get that to go. Actually, sorry, I just need to.
I was asking whether I'm using Wi-Fi from the phone. The Wi-Fi from the phone.
Yeah, I'm not on the Wi-Fi from my phone. So it isn't that. Right. What is an opportunity to show you is one of the challenges with these things is how do you get config into one of these devices? So what I did was I created a command mode key. So I'll say it. Sure I did the right one. There we go.
Command mode.
There we go.
Battery voltage.
So you can,
Off.
for some reason, there we go. So I'll just turn that off. So that's how you turn these off. There's no off button. Use the command mode and then turn it off. So let's see if that will work. They have the way I load config onto them is using NDEF records on RFID cards. So when I want to load config options, all I do is I program up an RFID card with a bunch of NDEF records that I want to put in it, put it in command mode, then present the NDEF record card, and it loads all the config in there. So yeah, that's the way that's the way I load new config in. The actual game server is on a Raspberry Pi 4. It runs Python for the main game code with a MariaDB. No, still didn't work. With a MariaDB to store all of the game data. It uses MQTT for the comms, and it uses pushover to send me alerts on my phone. So when a device goes online, you'll get an alert going, this device has gone offline, gone online. Anything like if somebody tampers with it, then it'll tell me there's been a tamper attempted on a particular device, and I'll get an alert that gets very annoying and very naggy if I don't acknowledge it. So yeah, it runs all within Python for the game server, and the way it communicates out what's going on in the game is by publishing sort of all the stuff that's going on to MQTT. So anybody could hook onto that MQTT feed. So it's publicly available, and you can just subscribe to Scoreboard, and you can see everything that's going on in the game. The individual comms between the devices and the game server is actually digitally signed. So they have an encryption key that they've agreed between them during setup, and then every message is signed as using this key. It's not proper cryptographic signatures. It's using SHA-2 hashes and injecting stuff into the message in the right places, because there's not really a practical way for me to do it, because the ESP8285 doesn't have cryptographic libraries of the right level to make it worthwhile. But it's at least enough to ensure comms can't be easily tampered with, because it's all clear text. Hidden features, there we go. So there was a bonus for EMF Camp and MCH players. So if you played before, they recognize your token and welcome you back. You saw the command mode. It looks at payment card identifiers and will actually say authorizing. It will say like Barclay card accepted or Visa debit card accepted if it detects it, and will then say authorizing donation to Polybius Biotech. Please wait. Just kidding. Which did catch a couple of people out. Did get a few cards go through. Apparently in 2022, this little girl used her pocket money card on it and didn't wait to hear the just kidding bit. But her parents were very understanding. They said, well, it's a lesson of where you put your pocket money card then, isn't it? There was also a capture the flag challenge in the game this year. So if you presented a specific UID to them, which was a dynamic UID of CTF, then it would give you a sequence number of the units, and each of the units has got a number on the back. So you then visit them in that exact sequence, and it would then play you back the flag and put you on the leaderboard of the flags. This was a scoreboard. Then this is the orbs. Sorry, this is the PolyCoin scoreboard. There's a lot more panels populated in the Polygen scoreboard, but I didn't have time to get a screen grab of it. So this had to do. Yeah. So there was a couple other things I wanted to cover, which I haven't shown here, which I did not get the opportunity to do in that's not it. This is the one. So the website that you saw on listed on the front of the of all the units was the gen.polyb.io web address, and this is what it is. Now this is written this is hosted free of charge on GitHub pages, so anybody can do that. You can create a GitHub account, create a GitHub page, and totally free, host your own website, uses Jekyll. A little bit of a learning curve, but you can effectively, it's a static web page. It compiles it for you. So whenever you commit a new file to GitHub, it will then recompile your website and update it. You can use custom domain names. So it's totally up to you. If you control it, a domain name, you can point it to GitHub pages and they will then host your web page for you under your own custom domain name, HTTPS included. Absolutely brilliant. So this is what this actually is. This is all hosted as static web pages in GitHub. So what I did was I wanted scoreboard. Well, how do you do that with a dynamic, with a static web page with a dynamically changing game? So what I did was actually iframed it back to a thing called using Metabase, which powered by Metabase. So you can download that free of charge. It's running on the same Raspberry Pi that runs the game server. So it's got a direct connection into the database, and all it's doing is looking in the database for the currently committed scores. So that shows you all of those, and you can see who the players are in the game. You can see if they're in square brackets, they are names it's allocated rather than ones people are set. So this Metabase is really quite good for just very quickly visualizing data. So if you can get it up and running, you can just point it at different data sources and pull them together and get it to make a nice little visualization for you, all free of charge. You don't have to sign up to anything, you just download it. There is also a players portal, and this was quite an interesting one. I wanted people to set their code name and see their scores and so on. So obviously I can't scan an RFID code on my laptop, but if you load this page up on an Android device using Chrome, then you can actually scan an RFID card and it will populate the RFID into this field for you. And then you can look up your stats or set your code name, depending on what those are. The bit that's interesting is this is that player's portal, the player's portal. So again, the challenge is with this, you're talking about a static web page. How do I do it? So with stats and info, all it does is it does a redirect to a page that includes the UID of your card and then pulls up the Metabase page with all your stats. So you can see your individual scores. But for the code name and so on, I had to have a way of communicating. So I wrote it in JavaScript. I'd never written JavaScript before, so this is probably appalling. And when I was editing it, it did look a lot more pretty than it does in this, because it appears to have removed all the carriage returns. But you get the idea. What it actually does is it utilizes MQTT to talk to the back end. But MQTT creates an interesting problem. How do you communicate back on a non-web port from the web browser? Well, that has problems. So what I end up having to do is actually create it using over WebSockets. So it actually opens up a connection to my MQTT server, which I've then exposed as WebSockets. Now, I'm just trying to see, is it in this one? Player portal. Oh yeah, and it's also saved a cookie. There you go. There's it saving a cookie. It saves a cookie because that's your UID. Actually, you know what, if I click on raw, does that give me a nice, yeah, there we go. This is the way we can see it better. So you can see there, this is the redirect to a specific dashboard, which is the individual, and then passes the token as a parameter. And it uses the UID, which is always 10 digits long, because you can have up to 10 digits in the standard. I've yet to see more than 7, but you can have more. And then so there's a set cookie, get cookie. There's the NDEF reader. Sadly, sadly, Apple do not support reading of RFID cards in the browser. It would have been nice, but they don't. Right. And we did briefly mention the scoreboard, the physical scoreboard. So that is written in Pygame. So it uses Python and Pygame. And again, that one's running on another Raspberry Pi 4, although it does run on a 3. I just grabbed the nearest device I had available. And it uses Pygame just to draw the different kind of images and overlays images. So it loads a bunch of media in and then just draws it on the screen, places them in different spots, and does some calculations to give you constantly varying sort of scores. So the scores are always, the top scoring team will always be full width. And then the others are based upon their percentage of that one. So it kind of works out how many points is 1 pixel and works it out where they should be from that. And it gives a real-time kind of ticker of things going on. So as somebody captures it, a little line will come flying in saying, so-and-so just captured this particular Polygen unit. Yeah. So I guess that's most of it. Does anybody have any questions?
Was the database?
It's MariaDB.
No, the sort of thing to draw up stats.
Oh, Metabase.
Metabase, yes. Database. Is that running on the Pi?
Yeah, it all runs on the Pi. I think you can get a Docker image, but I think I ended up just downloading it and following some manual install instructions. And all I need, and then I use Let's Encrypt to get a HTTPS certificate for it. Because why not have everything on secure web pages? Were there any?
Was the hardest part to through printing policy with a lot of versions, or it's just sort of?
Yes, lots and lots of versions. Yeah, there's a lot of scrappage. But I was printing in very cheap PLA for my prototyping and just kind of figuring out what worked and what didn't. I was originally trying. I discovered things like doing the magnet release. I tried many different things, designs, and none of them worked until I reached this one. Basically, it seems to be, and I've not studied this, but it seems to be that magnetic attraction is a square of the distance. So the further you get away, there's a massive drop off on how much it can actually pull. So I had to make them fairly close so that, and the release mechanism not travel very far. Which originally I tried a lot of things for the sides and top and things like that. It didn't work. Ended up having to be the back to pull it away from it. And it worked okay.
How would you command module framework?
So this is a flipper. It can just emulate any RFID. I couldn't find the command control token when I left, so I just used this to emulate it instead.
Oh.
So this, I pre-programmed it with it, so you can.
Oh.
That's all it is. It's yeah, it's an emulation thing. So I was just looking there.
I guess you try to reuse most of the hardware, and so you didn't want to change the people or something like that.
Yeah, the content, the hardware, I didn't want to change the PCBs. They worked fine for PolyCoin. So I was trying to minimize the cost. I'm already reprinting all the cases. So I didn't want to change the hardware in them. All I did was add a bunch of more LEDs to the front. So the front now had previously only had 2, and now it's got 12. So each part has a power management control. So the RFID reader has a disable pin or in shutdown pin, so you can turn the RFID reader on and off with that. ESP module, you send commands to turn it off, and then you wake it up with a reset on the reset pin. The MP3 player and the LED strips don't have power off, so I used FETs to turn them off. That's the only way that I could power manage them. And the PIC itself will just go to sleep. The way the power on and self-turning off work is that there's an enable pin on the 3-volt regulator. So what happens is when you push the power button, that turns on that enable pin. And then once the PIC has seen that it's got power for a certain amount of time, it then drives that enable pin itself, so you can then release the button. And at that point, the PIC can turn things off if it chooses to. But the PIC is the thing keeping the device powered up. Yeah.
How to work in real life on the day or on the weekend. All them survived, replacing batteries.
No, they all ran. They all ran fine. Sorry, I was just looking.
Expectations of the size your battery is such that you expect them to run all weekend, or what are you expecting?
I was hoping they'd run all weekend. So this was the battery graph for the different units. And you can see they all, except for one, because unfortunately that had a defective charge module in, so I couldn't charge it. But you can see they all were turned on the 31st of May, I think that was. It was they're all powered on, I think, on the Thursday, and then they were all turned off on the Sunday. So you can see in that time they all started at around 4.15 volts, and then they all finished sort of above 3.6 volts.
Now still playing your product with whatever you're doing.
Yeah. I mean the lithium ion 18650 cells, so their nominal is about 3.7. So when they get to they're regarded as well, my system regards them as low when they get to about 3.4, and then when they get to about 3.15, it regards it as flat and turns off. The reason for that is they could go a bit lower, but I don't want to stress the batteries, but also the MP3 player stops working around that voltage, so there's no point in carrying on.
Is that the limiting device, the MP3 player, or is it the PIC runs almost nothing?
Yeah, the PIC can just keep running. The PIC is a low powered one, so it can run down, I think, to about 2 something volts.
ESPs,
Those need 3 volts, I think. Okay. Yeah, so things would definitely start going wrong if it dropped much below 3. But yeah, I didn't want to stress the batteries that much anyway. But as you can see, over running solidly for three days, they had no problem. There's no problem in that time.
How long to recharge?
Recharge is probably, if I'm just charging it off a 1 amp supply, it does take a good few hours. Yeah, so when I was charging them, I literally had about 10 USB power supplies plugged in, just charging them up. So they were done in 3 batches. So I charged them all in the space of about a day and a half. So it doesn't take that long to charge them if you parallel them up enough.
That's what I just from working home.
Yep, that's true. That's true. Yeah, but this was one of the things I've.
Not even the house thing to get charges on.
Yeah, I mean, there is always that little bit of concern, isn't there? Homemade device, charging it up. My goodness. But it was quite interesting seeing what the batteries were doing, and you can see the difference that, so the probably the heavier usage and lighter usage ones. So I think this one up here, the very top one, is 2016's Worst Village. They chose that name, not me. These are all location names, but you can see that that did not get used very much at all. Whereas some of the others were in very popular locations and therefore got used a lot more. So their batteries are all the way down here. So the amount of usage definitely reflects how much power was used.
Was there an issue with the green line at the bottom?
Encourage or discourage scaffolding at each site?
That you can't do anything to defend it. So you have to wait for the catch to complete and then try your luck. Sorry, somebody said something on the call.
Yeah, is there an issue with the one at the bottom, the single green line on its own?
So that one had a faulty charge module and I was struggling to get it to charge. You may also notice that it vanishes offline before all the others. And the reason for that is someone stole it. So of all the ones to steal, they probably stole the right one for me. But yeah, unfortunately, it went missing and has never been seen since. The remaining 25 units are still around. So,
Same number of units you had previously, or
sorry?
would you have 25 units previously, like the previous years or whatever?
I don't honestly know how many. I think it was probably about 22 working units back then, about 20, 22. So I did get a few more up and running because I fixed some PCBs that had random faults.
So even though these were the same hardware, was it more reliable because of the batteries or the casing or anything like that, or is it pretty much the same?
The case definitely helped reliability because unfortunately what happened with some of the others was that they collided with things and flew apart into pieces. So yeah, the improved case definitely helped. Also, the improved kind of fact that it's hung from two things means that it doesn't tend to kind of spin around. The PolyCoins were hung from the center, and of course, when they got in a windy condition, they could end up spinning around very, very fast, and that wasn't good for them either. So yeah, it's helped.
Great. Thanks very much, Mike. That was really cool.
Yeah.
It's very lots of things going on about it.
Yeah, there is a lot. I was just going to say, so that's all my contact details. There's on GitHub there is actually a Polygen entry, and that's got everything in it. So it's got the case designs, the code. Yeah, it's got the PCB design. So everything's in there. The code is marginally out of date. There was some updates to it before EMF Camp, but it gives you an idea. And I will update it when I get a moment.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike. Very cool.